News. Your logic is that chemical attacks must not go unpunished. Will you do the same again if President Assad does the same again, as you have suggested he has? And do you feel you have the public's consent, given that you have not even consulted MPs in Parliament?
As I said in my statement, the purpose of the action that took place last night was to degrade and deter the capability and willingness of the Syrian regime to use chemical weapons. As I also said, obviously a full assessment has not yet been completed, but we believe that the action was successful. But the Syrian regime should be under no doubt of our resolve in relation to this matter of the use of chemical weapons. And I have taken this decision because I believe it is the right thing to do. I believe it is in our national interest, but I believe it is also important for the international community to be very clear about this issue, that we have seen people appearing to think that they can use chemical weapons with impunity. And we must restore the position of that, as I said, has existed for nearly a century, that the use of chemical weapons is illegal, it is banned, and we cannot accept it. Tim?
Thank you, Prime Minister. Tim Shipman from the Sunday Times. You were hinting towards the end of your statement there about possible further wider action against supporters of the regime. Can you explain why you haven't yet taken action against Russian money in London in the same way that the United States has? And on a linked point, we appear to be in a propaganda war with the Russians. Why have no ministers been out explaining what you've been explaining today throughout a week in which the Russian ambassador has been accusing Britain of culpability for the crimes that you've addressed this evening?
Well, on the first point, as you will know, Tim, and as I said in response to the use of the nerve agent on the streets of Salisbury, we are, of course, looking at every aspect of the action that can be taken. We do, in general, work against illicit finances, against criminal finances here in the UK, and we will continue to do so. You say that no minister has been out over the past week. I've given 2 television interviews over the past week in which I've set out the need for action and the need for us to restore the international norm of the recognition that chemical weapons should not be used. What I said in those interviews was that we were working with our international partners and allies to ascertain, make the fullest possible assessment of what happened on the ground, and then to ascertain what action was necessary. We've done that, and the action that we saw last night into the early hours of this morning was the result of that work. Adam.
Prime Minister, I wonder if you could explain a little more your decision and your thinking on not seeking prior approval or debate from Parliament on this decision, because, as you know, Jeremy Corbyn and, on the other side, Kenneth Clarke have both said that they feel that that should have taken place, and there seems to be a feeling abroad that Tony Blair set a precedent back in 2003. Well,
as I said, as I've just said, I believe that this action was necessary. I believe it was the right thing for us to do. We have been working with our allies and partners over the past week, first to make the fullest possible assessment of what happened on the ground, and then to consider what action was necessary, and to do that in a timely fashion so that we could act with sufficient understanding of what had happened on the ground and proper planning of any action, but to do so within a timescale that gave a very clear message to the regime. And it was also important, and I believe it is important, as we are sending, it is one of the gravest decision that a Prime Minister can take is to send our service personnel into action, into combat. And when we do that, we owe it to them that we, as far as possible, protect their safety and their security. And for operational security reasons, it was right that we've acted in the way that we did. Properly plan this, assess what happened on the ground, properly plan it, act within a timescale that's right to both protect operational security and give a very clear message to the regime. Robert?
You explicitly linked the overnight action to the poisonings in Salisbury. Was the overnight action just about Assad, or was it explicitly a warning to Russia as well? The Secretary-General is warning that the Cold War is back, and he is fearful we don't have the institutional structures to contain it. How do we restore a sense of calm and security?
Well, first of all, I referred to the Salisbury, what happened in Salisbury, because it was the use of a chemical weapon, a nerve agent, on the streets of the United Kingdom. The action that took place last night was an action which was focused on degrading and deterring the operational capability and the willingness of the Syrian regime to continue to use chemical weapons. As I said, there have been many instances when we have seen them using those chemical weapons. But I believe it should also be a message to others that the international community is not going to stand by and allow chemical weapons to be used with impunity. We have, for nearly a century now, had a general understanding under the Chemical Weapons Convention that chemical weapons were illegal, that their use was banned. We have in recent times all too often seen chemical weapons being used. I think it's right that the international community has come together and said that we will not accept this, and given a very clear message about that we want to re-establish that international norm that chemical weapons are banned and should not be used. Yes.
Bénédicte Paviot, France 24. If chemical weapons are indeed used again in Syria, will the United Kingdom take part in more targeted strikes? And since, if it's in the coming weeks, Parliament will no longer be in recess, will you feel a bigger pressure to actually ask for that green light? And how important is it to you that President Macron is alongside and very much participating in this operation? How would you characterize the Franco-British entente about this operation?
Well, first of all, on the parliamentary front, and I apologise, I should have made reference to this in answer to the previous questions, I will be in Parliament on Monday to make a statement to Parliament and obviously to give parliamentarians the opportunity to question me about this. I believe it was right to take the action that we have done in the timing that we have done, as I've indicated, in relation to assessment, planning and operational security. And it was to send a very clear message about the use of these chemical weapons. I believe that the action that's taken will have significantly degraded the capability of the Syrian regime to use chemical weapons. We want to deter their willingness to use chemical weapons as well, but they should be in no doubt of our resolve, and I believe that is an international resolve on these issues, to ensure that we do return to the situation where it is accepted that the use of chemical weapons is illegal, is banned, they should not be used. I think, obviously, this has been a tripartite operation with the United States, with France and the United Kingdom. You asked specifically about the Franco-British relationship. I think we have a very good and close relationship on security and defence matters. That was enhanced in the summit that the Franco-British summit we had earlier this year. We have been, over recent years, working increasingly closely together on these defence matters.
Will you authorise and instruct, indeed, the RAF to carry out more targeted strikes, without or with a green light from Parliament?
As I said, in relation to this, I will be going to Parliament and will be making a statement in Parliament. On the wider issue, I did address the wider issue of this. This was a limited and targeted strike that took place last night, or series of strikes that took place last night by the three partners, but nobody should be in any doubt of our resolve on this issue, which is to ensure that we see a return to that international norm on the prohibition of the use of chemical weapons. Sorry, yes, the gentleman.
Thank you. Joe Watts, The Independent. The Syrian civil war has seen a huge displacement of people from the Middle East towards the West. I'm just wondering if you think that your action today and the threat of further action from the West will exacerbate that and cause more people, more refugees to come to the West. And if you can tell us what extra planning, extra actions you're going to be taking to address that point, ease the pressure on nations and help the refugees themselves.
Well, you're right to say that, of course, as a result of what has been taking place in Syria over the last few years, 7 years or so, we have seen a large number of people displaced within Syria and obviously a large number of refugees from Syria being displaced both to countries in the region and further afield. And, of course, we have been receiving a number of Syrian refugees here in the UK ourselves. But our focus has always been on support for refugees in the region, with considerable support to countries that have been providing refuge for them. Obviously, the Lebanon, Jordan and Turkey are the three countries that have particularly been providing refuge for them. The purpose of this action is to prevent further humanitarian suffering. I think nobody can have been anything but appalled at the scenes that we saw and we've read about from the attack that took place in Douma. It is right, I believe, that the international community has acted to give that very clear message about this use of chemical weapons.
Hi, Jessica Elgott from The Guardian. Prime Minister, are you concerned that you perhaps do not have the support of the British people for this action? Polling has shown that it's around a fifth of people who support further action in Syria. And what's your message to people who are uneasy about the action you've taken?
Well, as I said, I have taken this decision because I believe it is the right thing to do. I think my message to people about this is that this is about the use of chemical weapons. We have, for nearly 100 years now, had a generally accepted position in the international community that, because chemical weapons are illegal, their use is illegal, they're banned, and that has generally been accepted. We have seen that international norm being eroded. It's been eroded in a number of ways. As I say, we've seen a nerve agent used on the streets of a city here in the United Kingdom. But we have seen the Syrian regime continuing to use chemical weapons, despite the fact that after August 2013, they said they were dismantling their chemical weapons, and Russia guaranteed that that was taking place. Though that commitment has not been met. And so I think it is important that for the alleviation of humanitarian suffering in Syria, but also if we stand back and look at this more widely, I think it is in all our interests that we restore that international norm on the prohibition of the use of chemical weapons. Yes.
Glenn Owen, Mail on Sunday. How much did you agonise about this decision? Did it keep you awake at night?
As I said in my statement, and I've repeated since, that there is no graver decision that a Prime Minister can take than to send service personnel into combat. And it is a decision that I have not taken lightly. As you know, there have been a number of discussions here with the National Security Council and at Cabinet, together with discussions with our American and French allies on this. But at the end of the day, I felt it was the right thing to do, precisely because we have seen this growing use of chemical weapons. And I think that we must say this must stop. And it is in all our interests for us to ensure that the use of chemical weapons stops. And it's in the interests of all our futures to ensure that the use of chemical weapons stops. Yeah, here on the front row. Sorry, Jay, making you...
Hello, Toby Helm from The Observer. Obviously, there's been no parliamentary approval for this action for reasons of timing, apart from anything else. But when Parliament resumes next week, do you intend to try to get Parliament as a whole to back your strategy, which clearly you are opening the door to possible further action from what you say? Do you intend to push for a vote to get Parliament behind you?
Well, as I say, and as you've picked up, in fact, in your question, I think it was right to take, the decision was taken for operational reasons after we'd had the opportunity to provide the fullest possible assessment and proper planning, and I believe it was the right thing to do. But we will, of course, be giving an opportunity. As I say, I'll be the first opportunity when Parliament resits will be on Monday for me to go into Parliament to make a statement and to hear the views of parliamentarians on this issue. And I will be very clear with Parliament, as I have been clear this morning and have been clear with others, that this is not about action to intervene in the civil war. It is not about anything to do with regime change. It is about the use of chemical weapons. It's a limited and targeted set of strikes that have taken place in order to degrade and deter the capability to use chemical weapons. Sorry, on the second row here.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Rahim Al-Farsi from Sky News Arabia. During your many statements, you have repeatedly talked about the victims of the Duma incident. Have you considered, or are you considering, to have some of these victims have the care and the medical care as the same was given to the cripples here in this country or in the West? And secondly, if it emerges that the Syrian regime has got other chemical sites that have not been attacked, would you go after them, and would you enlarge your tripartite coalition?
Well, first of all, on the first point, obviously one of the issues that we have as the United Kingdom, together with other international parties, had concern for is the ability to access and provide the support necessary to victims, those who have been suffering from the humanitarian catastrophe that has been the use of chemical weapons, but indeed more generally in Syria. And as you will also know, we've made a number of attempts through the United Nations and others in other ways to try to ensure proper humanitarian access to people, to ensure that they can be provided with the proper medical care. And we will continue to push for that humanitarian access so that those who are innocent victims can be provided with the support that they need. As I've said in response to other questions, I believe it's important. This was a collective action taken by the UK together with France and the United States. There have been a number of other supportive statements from other international leaders that have come out following the action. The intent of the international community now must be to make every effort through a variety of channels to ensure that we can give this very clear message about the use of chemical weapons. That is what this action has been about, and that is what we will continue to press on in a whole variety of ways. Just behind you, Jay.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Japan's newspaper, Yomiuri Shimbun. Because of this continuing and heightening tension between the West and Russia, some people started to call this situation a new Cold War. And what would you do, or could you do, in order not to let this military activity lead to a new Cold War?
Well, as I say, this has been focused. This action has been focused on the activities of the Syrian regime. Obviously, the Syrian regime has been backed by Russia. Action has been about chemical weapons. There is also the wider issue of restoring peace and stability and security in Syria, a political situation to that. And we will continue to work with all partners. And, of course, Russia's involvement in that will be a part of that, to bring about that security and that peace for Syria for the future and a political solution for Syria for the future. Just alongside.
Simon Israel from Channel 4 News. Given the failure, as you have said in your statement, of all diplomatic efforts so far, what is the plan following these strikes?
Sorry, what is the plan for?
What is the plan, your plan, following these strikes?
Following these strikes. Yes, well, as I've said, diplomatic efforts in itself has not had the impact that we wished it would have. We've now taken the military action, and alongside that, we will renew diplomatic efforts as well. And some of those obviously will continue to be through the United Nations to press for proper investigatory capability, opportunities for proper investigation and the holding to account of those who use these chemical weapons. As I said, the aim of this is to degrade operational capability of the Syrian regime and to deter their willingness to use chemical weapons. But there is the wider issue of overall the message for the international community about the use of chemical weapons, and we will continue to pursue that through the United Nations and through other fora. Alongside.
Thank you. Ed Malnick from The Telegraph. Were there any communications with the Russian government or military about possible military action before it was taken?
This is not something that the United Kingdom has been involved in. As you'll be aware, this is a complicated picture in terms of operations that take place in Syria. Full and proper planning was put in place before these strikes were undertaken to ensure that we could